Hello and welcome to this third lesson in our topic of interdependence. In the previous two lessons we've looked at food webs and food chains, and we've also looked at bioaccumulation. In today's lesson we're going to be looking at ecosystems. So today's title, which you need to write in your books as you would do for any other lesson, is ecosystems. By the end of the lesson you should be able to define what a habitat is, you should be able to explain why different organisms have different niches, and you should be able to evaluate why different organisms are needed in an ecosystem. Now we're going to start with this first learning objective, defining what a habitat is, but before we do that we're going to define what an ecosystem is. And as we do for any other keyword in my lessons, we're going to write it in green. So our first keyword is the word ecosystem. Ecosystem. Now an ecosystem can be defined as all of the living and non-living factors in an area. Okay, so ecosystems include all of the living organisms, and their habitats, but it also includes things like temperature, water levels, carbon dioxide levels. So we can also put underneath here that it includes non-living things or non-living factors like water levels, or carbon dioxide levels. That says of, not all. Or carbon dioxide levels. Now, some examples of ecosystems which I've prepared could be, the most beautiful one that I could find was the coral reef. So a coral reef is found underwater. This is an example of an ecosystem because it contains all the fishes, it contains all the coral, but it also contains water. It also contains levels of oxygen that are dissolved in the water. Another example of a ecosystem would be the rainforest. Again, a very beautiful one. The rainforest includes all of the trees, it includes all of the animals, it includes other plants, but it also includes things like humidity, oxygen levels, carbon dioxide levels. So the rainforest is another example of an ecosystem. One a bit more closer to home that I could think of was wetlands. So these are wetlands from the north of England. This is an ecosystem. It contains trees, it contains water, it contains plant species, there would be animal species there. So these are all examples of ecosystems. So the best way for me to do this is to just write over the top of them what they are. So this is a coral reef. This is the rainforest, and these are wetlands. Now, all of the organisms in an ecosystem rely on each other to survive. If one organism dies, that will have an effect on the other organisms. Therefore, we say that they coexist. coexist. They exist in the same place at the same time. So we can say all organisms in an ecosystem coexist and rely on each other to survive. Now, to answer our first learning objective, another key word that you need to know is the word habitat. Habitat. And a habitat can be defined as where an organism lives in an ecosystem. Where an organism lives in an ecosystem. So, for example, the fish live in the water around the coral reef. That is their habitat in this ecosystem. Monkeys in the rainforest or any other sort of primate may live in the trees. Their habitat would be a nest in the trees. In the wetlands, the fish have their habitat in the water, whereas shrews and things like that have their habitat in the long grass. A community is all of one organism or all of the organisms found in an ecosystem. Okay, so a community is all of the organisms in an ecosystem. All of the organisms in an ecosystem. Okay, so an ecosystem is all of the living and non-living factors in an area. This includes living organisms and their habitats, and it also includes non-living factors such as water levels and carbon dioxide levels. Examples of ecosystems include a coral reef, a rainforest and wetlands. All of the organisms in an ecosystem coexist and they rely on each other to survive. A habitat is where an organism lives in an ecosystem, and a community is all of the organisms in an ecosystem. Okay? So, if we have a look back at our learning objectives, you should now be able to tell me what a habitat is. Let's have a think about different niches. So if we can refresh our screen, send it back to black. Oh, no, we want to go back to black, don't we? We want a green pen because we now need to define a niche. A niche. N-I-C-H-E. Niche. Now, a niche can be defined as a particular place or role that an organism has within an ecosystem. So, a particular place or role an organism has within an ecosystem. Okay, so for example, a tree or a plant, a producer, captures sunlight from the sun and turns it into chemical energy. That is its niche. So we can say, e.g., producers capture the sun's energy and carry out photosynthesis. Okay. Now, sparrows and squirrels both live in tree canopies, but they do not compete for food. What this means is two organisms will not have the same niche. They will do something slightly different. So we can put that two organisms will never have the same niche otherwise they will be in competition. They will be in competition, which is what we're going to talk about next lesson. Okay, so two organisms will never have the same niche, otherwise they will be in competition. And we can say underneath here, e.g., squirrels and sparrows both live in trees. Okay. However, squirrels feed on acorns while sparrows feed on caterpillars. That means that they don't have the same niche. They both have a different role to play. If they both tried to eat acorns, one would die out. One would be able to get the acorns better than the other organism, and therefore the other one would die out. So we've said squirrels and sparrows both live in trees, and we can say but have different food sources. And therefore different niches. And we can just put at the bottom somewhere, we can say squirrels eat acorns and sparrows eat insects. Insects is one word, isn't it? Okay. So a niche is a particular place or role an organism has within an ecosystem. For example, producers capture the sun's energy and carry out photosynthesis. Two organisms will never have the same niche, otherwise they will be in direct competition. So that is an M, so it should say competition. For example, squirrels and sparrows both live in trees, but have different food sources and therefore different niches. Squirrels eat acorns, while sparrows eat insects. So it says, can you evaluate why different organisms are needed within an ecosystem? So thinking back to what we said about food webs, Ecosystems rely on different organisms to provide different food sources. If the trees were to die out, then obviously there'd be no producer, and therefore all of the food chain above it, or food web above it, would die out. Each organism has a role to play in an ecosystem to keep others alive. Okay? So the final thing we're going to write down, and we're going to put it in red, we can say that all organisms play a different role in an ecosystem, full stop. We can then define the word interdependence, so I'm changing it to green so that you know that it's a key word. So our keyword is interdependence. Interdependence. And we can define interdependence as the way in which living organisms rely or depend on each other to survive, grow and reproduce. To survive, grow and reproduce. So if one organism dies in an ecosystem, that will have a knock-on effect on the other organisms within that ecosystem. So you should now be able to tell me what a habitat is. You should be able to define why different organisms have different niches, and you should be able to evaluate why different organisms are needed in an ecosystem. I hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions, please drop me an email or comment in the Google Classrooms, and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Until the next lesson, stay safe, and I will see you then.